How you doing?
All right. Okay, Tov, everybody. As I said in the message, we're going to be today and next week. We're going to be only on Zoom. And we learned today for the Ilui Nishmat Avigdor Chai Avram ben Meir Tzvi V'Rachalea. In addition to that, I'd like to also learn for Refuah Shlema for Batya Chaya Bat Sarah Bracha, and also Ilui Nishmat, my father, who Avi Mori Zichrono Livracha, whose third yard site will be this coming Shabbat. Okay. If you remember, I know we're in chapter 19, but if you remember, chapter 11 was very long. We spent quite a bit of time on it. The topic of Nikiyut. This is like the second longest chapter, chapter 19, about Chassidut, because he gave us a general direction so far, which was that, what does it mean to be a Chassid? It means to take every mitzvah and every opportunity for mitzvah and every action we do that's positive and try to do it to the best way possible. And not only that, something that we may in fact not even have to do, we still do. I'm going to give you an example he doesn't give, and then he's going to give page after page of expressions and descriptions of first Ben Adam L'Chaveiro, between man and fellow man, of how we can expand on doing those things better. Then I'll go to Ben Adam L'Makom. But I'll give you an example. If you find a lost object that has a siman, it has some kind of identifier on it, a name or some phone number, some way to identify the person. In that case, you have a responsibility to do what's called hashavat aveda. You have a chiyuv min Torah, responsibility from the Torah law level. Not only do you have a responsibility to return it, there's a isur, there's a prohibition of v'hitalamta. You're not allowed to pretend you don't see it. There are certain times where you don't have to do it, but the vast majority of the time, if you find something that's lost, you have to return it. That is not the case when you know for a fact the owners have expressed what's called yeush. They've given up hope. So, for example, if you have found, you're in the vadi behind my building, and you find at the bottom of this valley a ball, a soccer ball, with someone's name written on it. It's pretty obvious who it belongs to. It might even have a phone number on it. But it's obvious it's been there since the last winter. It's been buried under some brush. 100% that person who lost the ball gave up hope on it a long time ago. So you have no mitzvah whatsoever. You have no chiyuv, rather, no requirement to return it, because now it's considered hefker. It's considered ownerless. And therefore, if it's ownerless, you're allowed to take and keep it. However, there's another mitzvah in the Torah called the asita yashar ve'atov. You have to do what's right, straight. And that falls into the category of chassidut. To go above and beyond and to do that which you're not required to do. Because if it were your object that someone had found after you gave up hope, you would want it back. You do the right thing. So then you do get the mitzvah of returning a lost object. Okay. We're going to take a look at some of the things, we're going to take a look at this list of items that he mentions. We're in like the fourth or fifth paragraph in chapter 19. It will begin with the words, Ve'ata avi lecha ra'ayot. He said until now, he told us that there's two major categories of chassidut. One is ben adam l'makom, how we do a mitzvah, whether it's lulav, whether it's sukkah, chanukiyah, whatever it might be. And then there's the ben adam l'chaveiro aspect, how we treat each other. We talked a little bit about that last week. And he mentioned that this is the extreme importance of how you relate to another person in three areas: in the area of action, in the area of how you treat them physically, in the area how you treat them monetarily, how you deal with them spiritually, psychologically. If you call someone a name, not only is it prohibited, it is a tremendous isur that's mentioned actually in Shulchan Aruch if they don't like the name. I have a sister who's 4 foot something. She's very short. And when we were growing up, I used to call her Shorty. How's the weather down there? I'm not a giant. I'm short also, but she's my little sister. So she deserves to be picked on. I don't care what her age is. And then after about many years of that, she finally one day said, I really don't like when you call me that. So I stopped. You have to. Calling a person a nickname that they do like is fine, except we're going to see that may not always be the case. Let's take a look. He's going to say, I'm going to present to you now. I'm just going to put myself on mute for 1 second. Sorry. He's going to bring some proofs to what he said. Now, what does he need to prove? He just said that when a person wants to be a chassid, they need to expand as best as possible in all areas, in a positive way. So the reason he's going to do this, I believe, is because there are things here that we may never have even thought of. Some we could come up with on our own. Some are going to sound very strange, especially the first thing he's going to tell us, because it's going to sound very out of place. I don't think this would have been on the first thing on anybody's list. Here's some lists. It says, even though this idea, like I just said, is pretty obvious. I don't really need to prove anything. Nevertheless, he's going to do it anyways. In the chapter in the Gemara of Mesilat called Bnei Ha'ir, it says the following. It has a long list of questions of people. It says, Shalu Talmidav Rabbi Zakkai. They asked him, how is it you live to be so old? And this question appears in many places in the Talmud where a person was asked, what was the zechut? What is it you did in life that enabled you to live such a long life? His answer says as follows. I never peed anywhere within Dalet Amot, let's say approximately a meter, a couple meters of an area where I had davened. Now, I'm not going to go into it, but the idea is not necessarily in the literal sense, although that also is what it means. The Gemara happens to be, it's out of a lot of context, is discussing, because you were used to going to bathrooms. We have bathrooms, thank God, unless here in Israel, the bathroom is the side of Kvish Achad for many people, I guess. Like, hey, waving to people as they go by, drive by, that's something I will never get used to. Anyways, let's move back. But it's discussing the whole topic over there because there weren't bathrooms per se in many parts of history, and how you related to the location of davening and the location of a bathroom, in quotes. Okay, so he said he never did that. I never called my friend by a nickname. Well, you're not allowed to. So what's the chassidut aspect? So he says the chassidut aspect there, and the Gemara tells us, is not that he didn't call him by a nickname like Four Eyes or Dumbo or something. He didn't even call him a nickname that the guy didn't even mind. I never didn't make Kiddush on Shabbat. And then he gives us a story, a couple things, to show the importance not only of what does that mean, Lo bitalti Kiddush hayom. This is what do you mean? How is that being a chassid? You're supposed to make Kiddush on Chag. You're supposed to make Kiddush on Shabbat. So the fact that he didn't ever skip it, why is that a midat chassidut? So let's take a look. He tells a story. I had an elderly mother. There was one incident where we had no money, literally no money in the house. And she sold, now in the time period of history you're talking about, a woman at that time very often wore two kinds of head coverings. What we would call today a payah or sheitel, although that wasn't necessarily a sheitel. And then something underneath that, some kind of a scarf. That she took out that lower scarf and she sold it to somebody to have money in order to buy wine for Kiddush. We see here as an example of how careful this person was as a midat chasidut, to be careful of mitzvot. Why? There was no chiyuv. There was no obligation on the part of the mother. The fact that they were so destitute, there was no chiyuv for her to have to sell that mitpachat, that saif, to buy kiddush or yain for kiddush. Kivan shelo hayalo, because they didn't have the wherewithal to do it. There was no requirement that they could make kiddush on challah. Doesn't say they didn't have challah. They could have made kiddush on challah. To such an extent, you had to go to such an extreme. However, because of midat chasidut, the person, Rabbi Zakkai, did this. And the idea that he was very careful in the kavod of his friend, the honor of his friend, that he never called him a nickname that wasn't even a negative nickname, because the even like the Tosfot explains over there. I'm not going to get into it again, but we would never want to be called ourselves by a nickname that we don't like. But there's a nickname that sticks, and it's not bad. It's no big deal, right? That's how he, doesn't bother me if someone calls me X, whatever it might be. But he was very careful, because we know that, I didn't look at the Tosfot, but I'm going to say my own idea here. Maybe this is what Tosfot said, I don't know. I gave a shiur a number of years back on the topic of names. And we know that it says when parents are about to name their child, that a little bit of a Ruach HaKodesh, not nevuah, not prophecy, but what's called Ruach HaKodesh, like a higher level of consciousness, let's say in modern terms, enters into them to help them name this child. So therefore, a name of a person it's extremely important. I've dealt over the years with names, with changing a name, adding a name. It's not pashut. You don't just say one day, okay, I don't like this name, I want to change it. In the States, if you didn't like your name, you go to the court, you file a petition, and change your name. Okay. But when it comes to Judaism, it comes to your Hebrew name, there's a lot that's attached to that. A lot of stuff that comes with that name. And it's not so simple to change a name, to add a name, depends on the situation. Rav Huna Gamken Kashar Gemia Levusho, the Mishamachav Hem Yano, Liknot Yan Kidushayom. Tells another story here that evidently he was so poor at one point that in order to buy wine for Shabbat, he sold his belt and he took a piece of like what we would call rubber band and tied it around his pants, his cloak to keep it, or his pants to keep them up instead of a belt. Again, showing that in spite of the fact that he was destitute and he was patur from having to go out and do something like that, we're not required to go to such a degree halachically, yet he still did it in order to buy wine. Now, granted that some of these examples are a little bit outlandish, and for the most part, for most of us, I would assume, don't really even present themselves as an option. Notice, let's say you're learning this chapter. You say, look, I really would like to try up my game a little bit. So far, we have not really been given what I would call practical examples for ourselves. What he's done so far is just, remember, he's doing a proof of how important this is. Now he's going to give us some things that we will, throughout this large part of this next many pages, to be able to apply to our own lives, to really put into practice. In order to understand the next one, though, I have to give you a little bit of halachic background. If I want to go from for those who don't know exactly where I live, it doesn't make a difference. I'll just use the example. If I want to go from my house to the other side of the mountain, meaning I want to go around from my building to say to Baranovich buildings. Again, if you don't know what I'm talking about, that's fine. I have two options. I can go down the street, come back around the curve and go up the hill, or I can go across the street from my house. There's a set of stairs and I can cross over to the other side. That's called an English a shortcut, right? I can, in theory, do that. No problem with that. However, there is a halachic problem in one place to do such a thing. That's called to make a shul a kapandaria. Kapandaria is a Greek-based word which is used in Aramaic, which means a shortcut. Let's say you're in the shul, and there's a door. For those of you who are familiar with Pnei Shmuel, I'll use it as an example, but it could be any shul. And you walk in, you want to go from one side of the shul to the other side of the shul, just to cut through the building, because you want to make a shortcut. You're not allowed to enter the shul, cut through, and go to the other side of the building and go through the other door without sitting down and saying a pasuk. The custom is if someone needs to do that, you come in, you walk in, you sit down, you say Ashrei Yoshev Eitecha Od Yalu Chasela, and then you go on your merry way and you cut through, because then you didn't make it a shortcut, you sat down in the shul. However, within the shul itself, there's a problem. If you are near the bima, in the middle of the shul, and you want to go from one side of the room to the other, you're not allowed to cut across the bima. You have to go around the bima. You're not allowed to cut across that. That's called also a kapandar. You're also making it a shortcut. You're not allowed to do that in the shul. There are other things you're not allowed to go into the shul to protect yourself from the rain or from the heat, all kinds of stuff. But that's I'm not talking about the hallway. I'm talking about the actual physical shul. You're also not allowed to just walk in the shul to call someone to tell them to come out without sitting down for a second and saying a pasuk, because you don't walk in the shul to do something that's not kodesh. Now let's take a look at the next paragraph. Od Sham, also furthermore there. For those of you who are familiar with footnoting, you know that there's a word ibid, I-B-I-D, dot, which stands for ibidem, which when you look at a footnote, ibid or ibidem, which is Latin, means there, means that the previous footnote, the source is the same place. So in Hebrew, when you use footnoting, or in Gemara language, you say sham. It's the same equivalent of ibid. So od sham, furthermore there, mean ibid in Megillah. Shalu Talmidav Rabbi Elazar ben Shamua. The students of Rabbi Elazar ben Shamua, who evidently lived to be an old man, asked him the question also, how were you zochet to live long life? Amar lahem, he said to them, first of all, I never used the shul as a shortcut. Again, means he never cut across the bima, he never cut through the shul. And I never stepped on the heads of the holy people. What does that mean? Before there was a chairs and pews and desks and tables and stenders, as we are so accustomed to, very often they would sit on a stone, sit on the floor, and they never came into the room and stepped over people to get to somewhere. Is there anything wrong with it? There's nothing wrong. It might be dangerous to maybe step on someone's hand, but is there anything halachically wrong? There's nothing halachically wrong. But what does it do? Notice he said, "V'lo pasati," I didn't step al rashi am kodesh. I didn't step on the heads of the holy people. It's not appropriate. This is an issue of chasidut, both in terms of the honor or respect to the Beit HaKnesset and to his fellow man. Because it also is like, it makes it look like, I can step on you kind of thing, like you're nothing. Od Sham, furthermore, it says there in the Gemara, Shalu Talmidav Rabbi Preda. They also asked Rabbi Preda, how are you zochet a long life? Amar lahem, he said to them, no one ever beat me to the Beit Midrash. I was always first. And I never led the benching if there was a Kohen present. Nor did I ever eat from an animal whose matanot to the Kohanim, the animal parts that were supposed to give to Kohanim. I never ate from an animal that they didn't yet already give the matanot to the Kohanim. So I'm going to ask you a question. By the way, this is going to go on another few paragraphs where they ask various people in the Gemara, how did you live to be so old? And it almost sounds like bragging. Like, you know what, I was always the first one to make me Josh. Look at me. And not only that, look how long I lived because of that. So how is it that they can say stuff like that? So there's a Gemara that ends, that the last Mishnah, I think it was in Sota. I think. Actually, let me just pull it out. Just okay, before I shoot my mouth up, let me just double check. No, it wasn't so. Here it is. It is. I like that. So the Gemara before this was discussing the fact that said that at the time of the death of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, I think that's what it's referring to here. Let's have to look and find it. Here it is. I'm sorry, I didn't think about that just now. Okay, it's not just Rabbi. Let me read something to you. Rabbi Chanina, Mishamet Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa. It's the very end of Masechet Sotah. When Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa died, Batlu Anshe Ma'aseh. The people who did good things, good actions in life, there was no more of them. Mishamet Abba Yossi ben Katuta. Rabbi Yossi, Abba Yossi ben Katuta died. Batlu Chasidim. There are no more Chasidim. Lama Nikro, okay, blah, 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 blah. Rabbi Shemet ben Azai, when Ben Azai passed away, Batlu HaShakdanim. The people really were, put them a full effort into the Torah and everything else, there were no more of those people. Mishamet ben Zoma, Batla Darshanim, and Ben Zoma died. The people who were able to do what we call in English biblical exegesis. How often you get to use that expression on Torah? There are no more. Mishamet, Rabbi Shimon ben Gabriel, So elsewhere in, I forgot where it is, it doesn't tell me here, it said, don't say, a person says about himself, I'm not going to go and find the Gemara now, don't say that there are no more Chassidim, there's me. Don't say there's no more Shaktanim, there's me. Another guy said this, another Amar said, don't say that there's no more Maseh, there's me. How in the world can someone say that? It's like saying, what do you mean there's no one who's an anav, who's humble? Look at me, I'm so humble. So the answer is like this, I think. And the same thing is true here. When Moshe Rabbeinu is referred to in the Torah as the anav mikol adam, most humble of all men, it does not mean, I've said this before, in this class, I've said it in almost every class I've ever taught, it doesn't mean he would go in his tent at night and say, "Oy, Tzipora, Nebuch, I am such a zero. My mom is probably so disappointed in me." That's not what it meant. He knew 100% who he was. But he also knew to attribute that all to Hashem. And everything he was able to accomplish only because Hashem enabled him to do that. But there are times when you have to speak up because of an educational reason. I shy away usually from telling people what I learned, because I don't think it's not that anybody's business, but it's private. I learn. I have a number of things I learn every day. I try. But there was one time not that long ago that in a talk, I explained not only what I was learning, I think maybe in this class, and why I learned this. And the purpose wasn't to say what I'm learning, but it's why I was learning. The inspiration I received from different people. I did mention this class a little while back. And I think maybe the first time I ever did that. And the reason is sometimes you need to do something for educational purposes. You need to say to somebody, look, you may not do X right now, but let me give you some words of encouragement. Let me explain to you that it can be done. And when the Gemara tells us there's no more Shaktani, there's no Baalei Maaseh, then these people had to stand up and say, look, not because I'm a show-off, not because I have to say, hey, look at me, how great I am, but because to not give up, to have other people give up hope, saying, oh, why should I even bother being a darshan? Why should I even bother being a shakdan? Why should it can be done. And the same thing is true over here. A person could say, well, how did you live such a long life? By the way, how do they even know? I have no idea. But the fact that they said, and they gave an answer, how did you be zochet to such a long life, is they want to give the person divrei idu, words of encouragement, that sometimes the things that we consider maybe the littlest thing in the world, the smallest little possible issue that when we are dealing with somebody, that sometimes it makes a tremendous impression. Let's continue to see some other issues. By the way, you'll notice no one answered when they said, and no one will answer, how did you live a long life? Because I did kibud aveim, and because I did shiluach hakan, sending the mother bird away, which the Torah explicitly tells us, because those are mitzvot, doraita, that have to be done. And we're not talking about that when it comes to chassidut. We're talking about the next level, taking the basic mitzvah and adding to it. And even when there's no official mitzvah, there's no mitzvah that says you don't step over somebody on the like that. I don't know about you. I grew up, we had my mother's mother, Lashon, was a very superstitious woman from Poland, brought with a lot of the old world superstition with her. So if we were lying on the floor, let's say I was lying on the floor and my brother or my sister would step over me, you had to step back over the person because otherwise they wouldn't grow. It was this big superstition. That actually stuck in my head. I don't do it, but I still would not walk over someone because of that. Not because of what it says here in the Yesharim of the Gemara. Vamru Oj, and furthermore, it said there, Shalu Tamidavet, Rabbi Chuni ben Hakana. They also asked Rabbi Chuni ben Hakana, how did you live? How are you zochet to live such long life? Amar lahem, he answered to them, Miyamai lo nitkabadti bekilon chavirai, lo altal mitati ki ladat chaviri. There are a couple ways that you can build yourself up in life. You can do well. You can, so to speak, in quotes, climb the corporate ladder, or you can see to it that the other guy fails and now you step into the position. I'm talking metaphorically. Sometimes a person is in a bad situation and his friend takes advantage of that. Sometimes there's a public humiliation, God forbid, of somebody, and the person's almost dancing on the grave already. There are also times where there have been disputes, arguments between people. I know it's hard to believe, but Jews sometimes don't get along. The only time we seem to get along is tragedy, which is sad. But sometimes we don't get along. And when there has been a situation where there's been a curse, there's been something said that shouldn't have been said. He said, I never went to bed with this over my head. I always tried to make shalom, make peace, always. Mefaraj Hatam explains over there. Now he's going to expand on this idea. What happened was Rav Huna was carrying a shovel on his shoulder. So this student of his, or a colleague of his, came along and said, and took it from him. Amarle, he said, so Rav Huna said to his students, if it's normal in your neighborhood for you to walk around carrying a shovel like that on your shoulder, then you can take it from me. And if not, then I am going to be praised by your bizayon, by your derision. What does that mean? Let's say Mr. X is walking with something on his shoulder. Another guy walks by and says, oh, no, let me take that from you. You shouldn't have to carry that. And he gives it to him, and someone sees that. What would the observer think? Not that it was heavy. Oh, this guy must be pretty important. And at the same time, this other person is carrying it. He may not be that important a person. And so he said, not even to allow or to enable another individual to think negative about another person, that would never enter his mind. What is this telling us? If you're present with somebody and an individual makes a comment, obviously it's Lashon Hara, but even besides that, makes a negative comment about another person. That's a halacha. You know you can't accept that. You know you can't let it go by. You should stand up for the other person unless you know this other person will continue blabbing against him. But we're not talking about something like that. That's a cut and dry thing. Here we're talking about only an impression, only something that's in the mind, that you don't want to do anything that would leave the impression with somebody else that you're more important and this other person is so much lower or less important on the totem pole. By the way, that's a misconception. We say, oh, the lower, he's the low man on the totem pole. On a totem pole, the historical background was the lower you were, the more important you were. So go figure how it became the opposite. I don't know. How do I know that? Morenu v'Rabbeinu Rav Google Shlita. It's a tremendous source of information and knowledge. And obviously I have a lot of more time on my hands than I need. Harelanu, we see from this that in spite of the fact that the meaning of gaining from another person's downfall or derision is the doing something physical, Chassidut means that even though you there's nothing really negative that's happening here, even though there's the impression that somebody else may be a little bit lower station than you or a little bit less important than you, that would never allow the person to do this action. Even if your friend is okay with it, if this would cause any kind of bizayon, like derision, to your friend. Now, there is some exception to this, and that has to do with Kavod HaTorah. I'm not going to get into that. I'll try to get back to that at a different time. I'm not going to get to it today. And then based on this concept and this topic, Rabbi Zera said to us, I was never overly makpid. How am I going to say that in English? Let me see. I have a book here in English. Let me open it up. I don't remember how you're supposed to translate that in English. He's not too makbid, not punctilious. Strict. Okay. I was never overly strict in my household. Okay, so let me explain to you what that means before we go further. How you talk in your house, how you act in your house, how you relate to family members, whether they live in the house or come to visit the house. This is what they say in Hebrew, yesh v'yesh. There are different ways, the different approaches to do it. There are some houses where, unfortunately, the family walks on eggshells. They live in fear almost of what could happen in the house. And because the parent is very strict, overly strict. Oh my God, they dropped a glass and broke it. They're in big trouble. There are others that are extremely flexible. Drop the glass, okay, let's just clean it up. There are other areas of halacha where, in theory, a parent can be overly strict. One example, there's a halacha that says that if your parent walks into the room, you have to stand up. It's halacha. And if the parent walks in the room, leaves, and comes back, you stand up again. It can become tedious. It can become a little bit onerous. So they say that even though that is the halacha, the best thing is not to be extremely makbid or strict about that, because it is not right for the child. It's not fair to the child. You can still show one time, okay, get up, but in general, they don't need to keep getting up. But it has to be if your child does get up for you, and I have experienced this, then it's a good thing to say, look, I really appreciate it. There's no need to get up. If the child continues to do it, then you can continue. But you're not extra strict in the house because you want to foster a sense of shalom. We talk about, by the way, it's not shalom bayit, it's shalom bayit, because it's called smichut, it's possessive. It means the peace of the house. Because shalom bayit just means buy house, which a lot of people, I guess, do. Buy house, see ya. So Shalom bayit, we tend to think of we don't have fights, we get along, but it's more than that. It's the idea of the sense or the mood, or I call it the tone of the house. How is it when you walk into the house? Is it a strict nature? Is it an absolute disastrous nature? Or is it somewhere in between? So he says, like Padati b'toch beiti. Furthermore, he says, Lo tza'ati b'fnei misha gadol mimeni. I never walked in front of someone who was a higher stature than me. We assume that means in terms of Torah. Lo hirharti b'mava'ot metunafot. I never even thought words of Torah in an area, in an alleyway where it was dirty. Again, we're not, we used to think of the fact you walk out of your place and you have what we call it, sorry, they have a big green garbage can. So all the garbage is in there. And we don't have to worry about sewers, except my son-in-law. We have to worry about, he's a plumber, worry about sewers because everything's underground. In the old days, you had sewers ran in the streets and the garbage was piled up until they were to remove it to the city dump, the equivalent of. So when he was near something that was dirty, not just a bathroom, he wouldn't have any thoughts of Torah at that moment. I never walked anywhere without wearing tefillin, even 4 amot. I never fell asleep in the Beit Midrash, not even just like a little nap, nor actually going to sleep. There's another thing you're not allowed to do in your shul. You're not allowed to actually close your eyes on purpose to go to sleep. If you fall asleep, like the rabbi's talking, or you're learning something, you start to wane, to fade. Okay, but you can't go to sit down purposely to go to sleep. He said, I didn't even do it just for a little quick nap. I never was in a state of joy at the downfall of my friend. Nor did I ever call my friend by nickname. We saw this already before by somebody else. Here are a bunch of ideas, of actions of Maaseh Chasidut I've mentioned. I'm going to read this last thing. Hopefully I won't run out of time before the end of the video thing, the Zoom session to explain. Haiman Debai the Mehevi Chasida. Gemara tells us about a person who wants to be a Chasid, he has to work hard at always learning and putting into practice the area of brachot. Brachot is probably one of the most complicated areas of halacha, believe it or not. You have to really be a baki in brachot. That is when it comes to between him and Hashem. Others say they want to be a chassid. You should be very careful and know all the area of halacha of damages, so you don't, God forbid, hurt someone physically or spiritually or mentally the wrong way by accident. And that is the ben adam, the chavero, between man and his fellow man. And this is the conclusion the Gemara comes to in Bava Kama. The best way to be a chassid is to keep what it says in Pirkei Avot. Why? Because Pirkei Avot deals with both ben adam chavero and ben adam makom. And when you're really good at following the words of Pirkei Avot, then you can become a true chassid. I have, according to my screen, 2 minutes and 26 seconds to tell you what I want to say. Pirkei Avot, which is really just Avot, was originally 5 chapters, became 6 chapters for various reasons, which I won't discuss now, maybe next time. It is the only Masechet, the only section of all Mishnah that has no halacha whatsoever. There's no halacha. So if that's the case, how in the world am I going to learn to be a chassid if it's not halacha? That's the whole point. Chassidut is not about keeping halacha. We already know you got to be a good Jew. You got to keep halacha. We're talking about going above and beyond, and the above and beyond is in 2 areas: ben adam lamakom, between you and God, and ben adam lachavero, between you and your fellow man. And in order to get tips on how to do that, it's Pirkei Avot. Some people think, okay, I'll learn Pirkei Avot between Pesach and Shavuot, which is the Sephardi way, or I'll learn Pirkei Avot between Pesach and Rosh Hashanah, which is the Ashkenazi way. But otherwise, I don't need to deal with Pirkei Avot. It's nice stuff to learn here and there. I've taught Pirkei Avot. It's amazing. It's so much deep stuff there. And you can really learn a lot about what it means to be even a better Jew than you already are by learning Pirkei Avot. My suggestion, if you're always anyone looking for something new to add to the repertoire, even just a Mishnah day, something, read Pirkei Avot, because it'll help you with this. It'll help you with Midat Chasidut. And I told you when we started this chapter, this is not one of those things that's beyond our abilities. Everyone has an ability, even within just some area, in some slice of an area, to be a Chasid. And one of the ways to do it, tells us the Gemara, is to really spend time learning. I don't mean just reading, but learning and going into depth on Pirkei Avot. In the meantime, I have less than a minute to say, have a nice day. We'll get together, Bezrat Hashem, next week on Zoom. And then after that, hopefully in person. Be well, everybody.